that we're asking for, our demands, are the bare minimum it takes to get by in Seattle. We are not asking for the moon, we are asking for what it takes to survive, and we are not here to negotiate something that is sub-living wages.
Welcome to On Strike, a production of Workers Strike Back. I'm Kshama Sawant.
And I'm Bia Lacombe. Millions of people around the country are watching and inspired by the historic battle of the UAW auto workers against the big three automakers, which has the potential to have an emboldening effect on the entire U.S. labor movement. This will particularly be true if it escalates in the direction of an all-out strike and the workers win their most important demands, including defined benefit pensions and ending all tiers. This past Sunday, 4,000 UAW Mack Trucks workers in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Florida rejected a proposed deal from Volvo Corporation by 73%, despite the deal being endorsed by the UAW leadership and President Shawn Fain. UAW Mack Truck workers are now out on strike, joining thousands of their fellow UAW members on picket lines. We have covered the UAW strike in 2 recent episodes, and Workers Strike Back activists and correspondents have been on the ground at UAW picket lines around the country. We will be returning to discuss further developments on the UAW strike soon. This week we'll be talking about 2 more localized union struggles. The first is a contract struggle of grocery workers in the Seattle area. Workers at PCC Community Markets, a Pacific Northwest chain of organic grocery stores, have been struggling with unlivable wages and declining standards of living. PCC workers, unionized with UFCW, the United Food and Commercial Workers, Local 3000, are fighting back. They have the support of Workers Strike Back, which has helped with the campaign and its strategy. Some of the PCC workers are also Workers Strike Back activists.
PCC says they're a community co-op. But if it's a co-op that creates food scarcities for its workers, that's absolutely shameful. That is not a real community. Yeah. We're not going to win our needs by going along to get along. It's going to be through militant rank and file action, just like the KCVG workers are doing right now.
A central role in the PCC workers' campaign is being played by a rank-and-file union caucus named PCC Workers United. PCC Workers United and their fellow workers are demanding $25 an hour starting pay, $35 an hour after 3 years on the job, and no cuts to benefits. Workers want one uniform wage scale across all PCC stores in the region, rejecting the divisive strategy by PCC bosses of pitting Seattle workers against PCC workers outside of Seattle to nickel and dime them all. Other demands are full staffing, the removal of the no strike clause in their union contract, and seats for cashiers.
It really is imperative that we get together in this contract fight and unite around these demands and show PCC that we will withhold our labor if it comes to them not being willing to pay a living wage and show us the books when they say they can't.
And you've heard of PCC Workers United?
Yes.
What do you think of that group?
I think it's a good showing of effort, like from the rank and file, because it's getting a lot more people involved than it has, especially in the last few contracts.
If you are a worker at PCC and you want to win these demands, make sure to go to the link in the episode description and sign PCC Workers United's petition right now. Grocery workers everywhere are struggling. According to a study conducted by UFCW, the largest union that represents grocery workers in the U.S., 78% of workers at Kroger can't afford to regularly put food on the table, a deeply ironic and disgusting situation. 44% of grocery workers can't afford rent, and 14% have experienced homelessness.
These are full-time union workers who are, in some instances, homeless. Like, you should never hear those words in the same sentence.
My rent went up $100 in the last year. My car insurance just went up $35. My pay has not went up at all.
It was just ridiculous. Every time I looked at the price of gas or the price of rent versus what you're getting out of that rent, or just even the price of food, like the food items here are ridiculously overpriced.
The first thing is increasing our base salary for the lowest paid employees in order to allow them to afford to live in this city. We didn't create inflation, we didn't create the rental market, but we do have to live here.
I know personally me and a few of my co-workers, we have to have our work an extra job just to make sure we have a healthy living situation.
It's people living out of their cars. That's the wage that's being offered. It's, people living in a tent. That's the wages that they're getting. The cost of living is exponentially growing, and our wages are they're not even keeping up with inflation.
Meanwhile, the CEO of Kroger, Rodney McMullen, takes home $20 million annually. That means on any given day, this leech of a human being will go to lunch with more money than most workers get paid in an entire year. Kroger, like other big grocery corporations, had a banner year last year and raked in over $4 billion in profits. Kroger executives and shareholders have been rolling in billions of dollars from stock buybacks, while many grocery workers, like those at PCC, can't afford to buy the food they're stocking and selling.
It wasn't always like this. Just a generation ago, grocery work was a stable middle-class job. We can thank militant struggles in the labor movement for that. Unlike many other industries that were ruthlessly deregulated and outsourced in the 1970s and 80s, consequently leading to a decline in union membership, union density in grocery industry remained relatively high. 29% of grocery workers were unionized in 1984, and the grocery industry has relatively greater union density even today, albeit at a much lower level than in the 1970s. Around 15% of grocery workers are members of a union today, compared to just 6% of all private sector workers. In the 1990s, the grocery industry consolidated as the largest corporations bought out their competition and monopolized. This weakened unions by making it harder to cut off corporate profits with the strike at a single chain. The trend towards consolidation continues today with a pending merger of Kroger and Albertsons, the two largest grocery corporations in the country. If the $25 billion merger goes through, it will lead to the shuttering of hundreds of unionized grocery stores across the country and will be a huge blow to UFCW and the labor movement as a whole. In the lead up to the merger, Kroger and Albertsons have already sold off more than 400 stores. This merger will also inevitably mean higher food prices for working people already struggling against inflation, or what has been appropriately termed greedflation, where especially in the food industry, corporations have dramatically and brutally raised prices in order to increase profits.
One thing is clear: cutting the wages of hard-working grocery workers has not brought down the cost of food. 7 months after hazard pay was scrapped, inflation in Seattle is at a 40-year high, and food prices are through the roof. Workers Strike Back believes that PCC workers and all grocery workers in Seattle, both union and non-union, need to build a united struggle for a living wage. And we need working people as a whole to have their backs.
The labor movement needs to rebuild strong rank-and-file-led grocery unions as part of a broader project of organizing the millions of unorganized workers in the retail and service sectors. A fighting union leadership basing itself on militant rank-and-file struggle and unafraid to strike multiple grocery chains at once could reverse the trends of attacks on grocery workers and halt the mega merger of Kroger and Albertsons. So far, unfortunately, the top union leadership has failed to mobilize members to protest or other actions, let alone organize strong strikes or put forward clear demands like a $25 an hour starting wage. This is where PCC grocery workers come in. Through PCC Workers United, their rank-and-file caucus, and UFCW 3000, they are fighting for historic demands that would be a crucial victory for working people in the Seattle area and grocery workers everywhere. A union rank-and-file caucus is a group of union members organizing independently among their fellow union members around common issues. Throughout the history of the labor movement, such caucuses have played a crucial role in pushing forward bold demands and a fighting strategy as the PCC workers are here, and often without the support of the top union leadership. PCC is a 70-year-old cooperative with 1,600 workers in 16 stores in and around the Seattle area. Like most cooperatives nowadays, it has a meticulously cultivated progressive branding, claiming on its website, for example, to have a mission to, quote, inspire and advance the health and well-being of people and their communities and our planet, end quote. While PCC claims to be different, in reality, the executives run it like any other for-profit corporation, spending as little as possible on the workers to the point that most of their employees make barely above the minimum wage.
The shoppers are so passionate about what we're doing right now. Some of them have been members longer than I've been alive. And they say, this store is not what it used to be anymore. And it's not a place I want to shop anymore. If you guys are making minimum and I'm paying out the nose, my hard-earned money, for this deli food, but it doesn't even go to you guys? What is that?
You're talking about customers who are co-op members.
Customers.
No, but not in the union, but
right,
they shop at the
shoppers,
store.
customers, right?
This is a broader phenomenon with cooperatives. Many may have begun with the intention of being community-centered, worker-run, and socially just, but under the relentless pressure of the bankrupt system of capitalism, they become increasingly corporatized, deeply unequal, and divested of democracy. This is the story of PCC. PCC CEO Krishnan Srinivasan is a former Lyft, Amazon, and Microsoft executive who takes a salary of $500,000 a year before bonuses.
You know, when the CEO makes 10 times more than what the average employee makes, that doesn't feel very cooperative. It doesn't feel fair. You know, I don't buy the management's position that paying PCC employees a living wage would bankrupt the company. I think it's morally bankrupt to tell your employees that they're essential and then treat them like they're expendable. And we're all pretty fed up with that.
The board of trustees includes former executives from corporations like Starbucks, Coinstar, and Kettle Foods. One of them also serves on the board of the Seattle Chamber of Commerce, a corporate lobby group notorious for viciously opposing virtually every progressive measure my social city council office has fought for here, from the $15 an hour minimum wage to the Amazon tax.
PCC executives have lavish offices overlooking Seattle's Elliott Bay, where they soak up the profits being created by a grossly underpaid workforce. Along with Kroger and other corporations, PCC fought against the $4 an hour hazard pay that Seattle grocery workers fought for and won during the pandemic for working in dangerous conditions. PCC executives claimed they couldn't afford it, while opening brand new stores in the region and moving to a larger location in Kirkland at the same time. While these grocery bosses thrive, workers' wages and living conditions have plummeted. Taking inspiration from other union fights, PCC Workers United is leading a powerful grassroots escalation campaign to win their demands, saying they're prepared to go on strike if that's what it takes to win.
So we are pushing to vote no, and we're going to push to go to strike. And if we have to strike to get what we need, we will. And PCC doesn't want that. But they don't seem to want to break out of the box and give us an offer that's actually going to make it so that people can survive who work here.
PCC workers began organizing last year when they were outright betrayed by Democrats on the Seattle City Council, including those self-described as progressive and pro-labor. In December 2021, at the height of the Omicron variant, and in an apparent Christmas gift to the grocery bosses, all City Council Democrats repealed pandemic hazard pay. Legislation scandalously sponsored by self-described progressive and labor Democrat Councilmember Teresa Mosqueda, whom UFCW leadership has endorsed in this year's election. That vote to end hazard pay was so embarrassing for the city's Democratic establishment that the then mayor, Jenny Durkin, an unabashed corporate Democrat, was forced to veto the bill. After 6 attempts that failed under opposition from workers and Kshama's Socialist City Council office, Democrats finally repealed hazard pay in August 2022. This time when the BA.5 COVID variant was surging. In other words, these Democrats gave grocery workers a $4 per hour pay cut, despite the hundreds who spoke out and said that those $4 an hour were a lifeline keeping them afloat, with the out-of-control cost of living, historic inflation, and near minimum wage pay scales. It was a brutal anti-worker attack done at the behest of the corporate bosses. The only elected representative who fought against the repeal alongside the workers for months was Socialist City Council member Kshama Sawant.
I do still urge council members to vote no on ending hazard pay, but if Democrats end hazard pay now, they will be doing more than terminating a crucial public policy. They will be saying, in the midst of this ongoing health emergency, that the lives and well-being of frontline grocery workers don't matter, whereas profits for the wealthy reign supreme. As worker Brett James said today in public comment, why are city council members fighting to take away hazard pay when instead you should all be fighting to increase the minimum wage and make this hazard pay a moot point?
Councilmember Dan Strauss, one of those Democrats who voted to end hazard pay, was later invited by UFCW 3000 leadership to speak at a picket organized by rank-and-file PCC workers. Strauss was shouted down by workers who clearly remembered his betrayal and were outraged that he was invited. PCC workers were again angered when self-proclaimed Labor Democrat Councilmember Andrew Lewis voted against a strong rent control bill this August. The legislation was brought forward by Kshama's office in solidarity with tens of thousands of Seattle's renters and working people, including many grocery workers. Lewis voted against an urgently needed relief from skyrocketing rents and did the bidding of corporate landlords in Wall Street.
One young woman came to me, and her husband both work here at my store. And she told me, we did the calculations, and the loss of hazard pay is equivalent to how much we pay for rent. And I said, where do you live? Because I was only like netting about $800 a month or something. And she goes, oh yeah, we share a 2-bedroom apartment with another 2 people. That's the only way we can make it.
Lewis sold out renters despite funding his campaigns through donations from UFCW and other unions. It wasn't just Lewis and Strauss. The overwhelming majority of self-described progressive Democrats both voted to cut grocery workers' pay and to block rent control. PCC Workers United had passed a resolution endorsing rent control, urging the UFCW 3000 leadership to do the same, which they unfortunately failed to do.
Our union, UFCW 3000, has endorsed Lewis for his re-election campaign. If he fails to support workers and renters like myself and votes no against rent control, we are going to fight for our union to revoke their endorsement, to show real accountability to these so-called labor progressives.
And on top of that, another self-described progressive and labor Democrat, Teresa Mosqueda, has said that she doesn't even intend to show up for the rent control vote.
How can these Democrats call themselves progressive while they actively avoid these questions of supporting workers, supporting renters, and instead supporting billionaire corporate landlords?
It's time for union leaders nationally to start fighting for what their members desperately need. It's time for them to stop pouring millions of dollars into campaigns of anti-worker Democrats like Lewis, with the dues money of hard-working and struggling union members. The latest Gallup poll released last week shows that nearly 6 in 10 Americans now say a third major party is needed because the Republican and Democrat parties do quote-unquote such a poor job of representing the people. That figure is a 7-point jump from just last month. Instead of wasting money on electing Democrats, unions should put that money towards strike funds and organizing drives. In fact, in a survey done by UFCW 3000, 7 in 10 PCC workers want their union to be more assertive.
And then on the union's platform, they had their own survey. One of the biggest things that also came out of that was that the workers felt that they weren't fighting hard enough, and that the union needed to fight harder for what the workers needed. You know, I harken back to when hazard pay was taken away. And one of my coworkers came to me, and she was in tears. At the time, her student loans were about to begin repayment again after the pause that had happened through the pandemic. And she didn't know what she was going to do. So she was really freaked out. She went home that night and found out that her bike had been stolen out of the locker down below. It was up to us coworkers to put together a fund for her so that she could have transportation again, so that she could get to and from work. She ended up taking another job.
The hazard pay repeal really set grocery workers back. But it also inspired a number of PCC workers to start getting organized for a strong contract that goes even further. Some of these workers went on to launch PCC Workers United. With the help of Workers Strike Back and Kshama's office, PCC Workers United has organized pickets, rank-and-file meetings, and community tables over the last 7 months. Over 1,000 community supporters, many of them working people who buy groceries at PCC and are themselves facing the steep cost of living crisis, have signed a petition in support of the workers' demands. In June, the Seattle chapter of Workers Strike Back held its monthly meeting on the PCC contract struggle, with PCC workers speaking, and used that event to help build up community and labor support for it.
The workers feel this, and that's part of why we're so energized to stand up for what we deserve and to build a broad-based fighting coalition of workers from inside of PCC, outside of PCC, fellow unions, and community members.
Most importantly, PCC Workers United is activating fellow rank and file to make it crystal clear workers won't settle for anything less than living wages, real benefits, and good union jobs. The contract negotiations are happening right now, and PCC management has made another insulting wage offer that would keep most workers at or near minimum wage for the next 2 years.
But we're still not seeing anything that would put people in a position that they can take a deep breath and feel comfortable. They're still being offered wages, even this far into the process, that are essentially a slap in the face.
I've been there over 4 years, and I make $20.25, which I think is totally unfair. I'm a cook in the deli. I cook as many recipes and do as many work as anyone in the deli that cooks, but yet I don't get paid as much as them. Sorry for the way I look. It's my day off, so I'm just kicking back watching TV. But I think it's crazy that management says that we're not worth the work we do.
In my experience talking to my coworkers, these demands are coming from very real needs immediately. We have coworkers that are leaving right now because they can't afford to even wait until this contract fight is over.
There's so much to be stressed about day to day, and not having to worry about money, whether or not there's going to be anything left for groceries after paying rent. That shouldn't be a luxury. Most PCC employees can't even afford to shop in the stores.
What that means for the ones that are still here is being rent burdened. It means living in a place that you're not comfortable staying.
25 would be great, so we can be able to spend time with our loved ones. We want to have time for that, but with the way it is right now, most people don't have the option where they have time to spend with their loved ones. Even on their days off, they still have to work. What's the point of having a day off if we still have to find extra income? But because I need that income, I have to do Easter cut.
We deserve 25 to start and 35 after 3 years. It's like a necessity. It's not something that we're just asking for. It's something we need.
25 starting to like the 35 would absolutely help kind of offset the cost of living and like the inflation that we've kind of lost in the last few contracts.
These demands, we wanted to be just upfront. We wanted to make sure that whatever we were doing, we were demand focused, that was going to be the focus, because that seemed to be resonated with our coworkers. And when we talked to people about 25, they were like, that would be a godsend, because right now we can't survive.
PCC executives are eager to wrap up contract negotiations immediately, especially as the busy holiday season approaches. Even though the bosses continue to make junk offers, many PCC workers are worried that their union leadership might accept a bad deal and try to ram it through over the heads of workers. There's a real danger that a weak tentative agreement with some minor concessions from the bosses but with no substantial improvements for the workers' lives could be reached at the next bargaining session next week. Tentative agreement, by the way, means a proposed contract being supported by the union leadership and bargaining committee. If a lackluster or bad contract is forced through, it would be a disaster for PCC workers. Under management's latest proposal, most workers would make between $17 and $19 per hour to start and wouldn't even break $20 over the life of the contract. In the Seattle area, that means being rent burdened and housing insecure. Over 300 workers on the basic health plan would see their deductibles and out-of-pocket maximums tripled, and other workers would see their healthcare costs go up as well. But PCC Workers United, with support from Workers Strike Back and the community, is prepared to organize for what workers need. PCC Workers United members have already collected over 600 signatures from their fellow workers on a petition with their demands. Those 600 signatures that workers have collected in just around 3 weeks show that there's real momentum. The tasks ahead for PCC Workers United are to win a strong majority of their co-workers onto the petition to show management that workers are really serious, united, and organized. If a tentative agreement is reached that doesn't meet these demands, PCC Workers United has indicated the caucus will discuss calling on workers to vote it down and begin preparing for a strike.
Of course, we say to everybody, this is first and foremost a petition to demonstrate to PCC that we're united and this is what we're going to fight for. We're not going to settle for less. And at the same time, we're saying it's also a message to the union leadership to say, don't be bringing us some industry standard contract that doesn't meet the basic needs of workers and expecting us to just rubber stamp it. We want 25, 35. This is not a highball negotiation here. This is the bare minimum.
Because when our coworkers are informed, they know which choices they are comfortable with making. And many of them are choosing to be ready to strike.
I definitely side on the side of the PCC Workers United in terms of how I'll vote.
If we have to go on strike to get the 25 and to 35 and that journey pay and one wage scale, are you willing to go on strike?
Yeah.
Next week, the day before the upcoming bargaining session, PCC Workers United and Workers Strike Back are organizing a rally at noon at the PCC at the intersection of 4th and Union in downtown Seattle. If you live in the Seattle area, please attend. That's Wednesday, October 18th at noon at the downtown PCC. Workers are also organizing a rally on Monday, October 23rd at 1 p.m. at the Columbia City PCC with speakers fresh from the bargaining room. You can sign up to attend at workerstrikeback.org/events.
Unfortunately, the UFCW 3000 leadership is not really fighting for the living wages workers need, even though their members have told them clearly they want the union to. In response to management's insulting offers, UFCW leaders didn't organize a rally or take other escalating action. Instead, they did the opposite and lowered their wage proposal by more than $6.
We were told repeatedly, like, hey, you guys, like, this is your contract. We'll do whatever you want. We'll make whatever proposal you want. We'll take votes. We'll do whatever we need to do to have consensus because this is your contract. It's your lives. It's your job. It's your coworkers' lives. But then when we took them up on that, we actually did push back and we did insist on our demands being, put over the table to the letter. We were told, like, oh, well, that's not the spirit of bargaining. I mean, we can have, strong demands out of the gate, but like, don't get married to them because they're not. And he actually told us on the first pass of our wage proposal, we're going to put it across the table. This is far from what you guys are actually going to end up with right out of the gate. I mean, you tell me that is a setting that's supposed to empower workers. I don't see it.
When that didn't happen, we made clear that we weren't going to tolerate this process as is, and that we were going to continue to organize outside of the bargaining room amongst our coworkers in order to continue the fight, prepare for a strike, be ready to stand up for what we deserve.
When we first started talking to people, it seemed like they were resigned to that. Like, that's just how it is. The union leadership doesn't care about us, and we can't do anything about it. But as we've continued to, we continue to go to stores to talk to people. We continue to follow people on the phone if we have their contact information. We started doing newsletters so we can get people information about what's going on. We asked UFCW 3000, why are you not doing this? Why have you not done this in the past? And they told us that, well, when people know what's on the table, they don't vote on the contract. And so our response to that is, of course, well, it sounds like people get contracts and they're not excited about them, so they don't have any reason to vote. What I hear from coworkers when I talk to them is the same thing. The UFCW leadership, they still don't think UFCW leadership cares about us, but they don't feel resigned to that anymore. They feel like they have workers at their workplace that are fighting for them, and they have a way that they can get plugged in and fight for themselves as well.
PCC Workers United members are understandably skeptical of what the UFCW leaders might do. A year and a half ago, the same UFCW leadership negotiated an agreement for 25,000 Seattle area workers employed by the major grocery chains, Kroger and Albertsons. While that agreement included substantial wage gains for many workers, it left pay scales, which previously had been abysmal, still well below the level at which workers could afford to pay area rents. And this came at a time that grocery corporations were reaping record profits. The deal was rammed through without workers even being able to see the full agreement. Outrageously, UFCW staff even called the police on some workers who were advocating a no vote outside the contract ratification meeting. Now, UFCW leaders are pointing to this larger agreement as the standard that PCC workers should aspire to, even though it leaves wages well below the $25 an hour level. And instead of helping to organize the PCC union membership, the top union leadership is calling workers' demands naive and unrealistic while attacking PCCWU and calling it a third party. This is exactly what the bosses say when they're trying to undermine unions. This is what Amazon executives at the Air Hub in Kentucky are saying about that union drive, as we discussed on the first episode of On Strike. But these rank-and-file workers are no third party. They are the union.
We've just continued to put as much information in the hands of our coworkers to try and plug them into every organizational process that we can so that we can build a powerful worker rank-and-file movement within PCC, because we are the union. We are the rank and file.
What's unrealistic is expecting PCC workers to continue living on wages that don't make ends meet and thinking workers will win through genteel negotiations at the bargaining table. PCC can afford to meet the workers' needs, but workers will need to force the bosses to concede.
What we're seeing from UFCW 3000 leaders is another sad example of business unionism in action. Rather than mobilize members to take on the boss in the kind of militant fight that will be necessary, union leaders are focused on the bargaining room and maintaining a good relationship with management. But power in the bargaining room comes from outside, in the workplaces and on the streets.
The only power you have in the bargaining room is the power that you have on the shop floor. So us as PCC Workers United, that's our main area of combat.
The bosses will only respond to seeing their profits threatened. The business unionist approach being taken by UFCW leadership will never win demands like $25 an hour. What's also worth noting is how union officials being paid vastly more than the workers they represent has unfortunately become a norm in the labor movement under business unionism over the last several decades. It has become commonplace, with leaders who make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year seemingly bent on insisting that union members accept less than a living wage. For example, Faye Gunther, the president of UFCW 3000, was making $166,000 a year in 2021, and Joe Mizrahi, the union secretary-treasurer, took home over $148,000. The base salary of UFCW's international president was a whopping $298,000 last year. Some local union presidents make even more. John Nicoli, president of UFCW 464 in New Jersey, took home a mind-boggling $700,941 last year, while the members he's supposed to represent struggled to survive. At the UFCW National Convention earlier this year, Gunther was among those who proposed a salary cap of $250,000 for UFCW officials. This would certainly be an improvement, but it's telling how out of touch many of these grossly overpaid leaders are that they would propose a cap of $250,000 a year. Most grocery workers make a fraction of that. We need a labor movement in which union leaders should take no more than the average wage of the workers they represent, as I do as an elected socialist in Seattle.
All of this is exactly why the pickets, community tables, and petitions that PCC Workers United members and their coworkers have been organizing are so crucial. It shows management that workers are getting organized into a force that could pull off a powerful strike if needed. Without that, what incentive does PCC have to give workers the wages and benefits they're demanding? We stand in solidarity with PCC workers as they battle for the contract they need, not settle for what's acceptable to the bosses. If they win their demands, it could boost the confidence of grocery and service sector workers around the country. Working people everywhere are being crushed under the weight of the cost of living crisis, at the same time that big corporations are recording record profits and CEO wealth reaches staggering new heights. Union workers have a powerful tool to counter the boss's attacks, organizing a militant fight back in the rank and file.
And workers all over the country are fighting back for larger wages and for better working conditions in general. And I mean, people, the billionaire class is hearing this. They're terrified of it. You can see there's a lot of reaction to it. But the more people get pressed down upon, the more they rise up. And we're seeing this all over the country. Workers Strike Back is part of this.
We'll keep you updated as this develops.
Now we will turn our attention to our second story in this broadcast. In New Brunswick, New Jersey, 1,700 nurses have been on a courageous strike at Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital. The nurses are unionized with the United Steelworkers Local 4200 and are fighting for much-needed improvements to staffing, wages, and benefits after years of a deadly pandemic and painful inflation. The crux of the nurses' strike right now is about safe staffing levels at the hospital.
I love being a nurse. It is all I've ever wanted to do. Carol Tansey has been a nurse for a quarter of a century and says it's impossible to care for the sick when the ratio of patients to nurses is too high.
The hospital has failed to recognize how important it is for us to have safe nurse-to-patient ratios.
There is a serious healthcare staffing crisis in the United States. This is expected to worsen dramatically over the next decade as the aging baby boomer population expands the need for healthcare. The Bureau of Labor Statistics predicts the demand for qualified nurses will increase much faster than for all other healthcare professionals.
In fact, we just had to interrupt this recording because Kshama and I and our on-strike crew, including producer Calvin Priest, cinematographer Margot Stewart, and sound engineer Sasha Sommer, had to attend another nurses' action, this one at the Virginia Mason Hospital here in Seattle. The nurses, unionized with the Washington State Nurses Association, are demanding safe staffing, living wages, and that management address workplace safety problems.
Whether we come to hospitals as patients or workers, we are the ones who are shortchanged. We are the ones who have to pay the price of the social chaos. Patients are likely in some of the worst crises of their lives when they're in hospital, but then nurses aren't given what you need in order to supply patients with even their basic needs. Short staffing, wages without cost of living increases, conditions of workplace violence, all of this has now become the norm that nurses and healthcare workers are facing. And why? Simply because the hospital bosses don't want to pay for any of this.
Experts recommend staffing ratios of no more than 4 patients for every nurse in a hospital. Any more than that creates a dangerous situation for patients. According to a 2021 study, the chances of a patient dying increase on average by 13% for each patient added to a hospital nurse's workload, as the nursing staff is stretched increasingly thin. Yet at Robert Wood Johnson, nurses regularly deal with 5-to-1 or even 6-to-1 ratios. This puts both patients and nurses at serious risk.
We are currently on day, what are we, 67 of our unfair labor practice strike. We essentially were in contract negotiations, and one of the most important things we wanted to accomplish was having ratios for nurse to patient in our contract with enforceable language so that the hospital would have to, do what they said.
The problem we have in healthcare right now is that we have a crisis. A staffing crisis is a healthcare crisis.
Nurses are on strike to demand that hospital management agree to firm staffing ratios in their union contract. In other words, they're on strike to demand that the hospital fulfills what should be its basic function, which is to provide quality care to patients. A staffing victory at Robert Wood Johnson would be a victory for all healthcare workers, many of whom struggle with short staffing on a nearly daily basis. The reason is simple. The overpaid hospital bosses don't want to pay the frontline workers who make the facility run.
We as nurses say, we don't want it to look good on paper. We want it to really be good. Yes, if you have all these committees that you spend all day in making up these acronyms for things of how systems are supposed to work and they actually work, that's great. But it's not working. Listen to the nurses. We're telling you what needs to happen. We're telling you, but yet you're going to go pay a consultant to come in and analyze the problem and then tell us what's wrong. The problem is we need more nurses.
These nurses have been on strike for more than 2 months, and throughout, they have faced vicious attacks from the company. On September 1st, management cut their healthcare benefits.
We are not receiving a paycheck. We have had our benefits terminated, and now we're being slandered. They literally, I honestly don't understand what their end game is by making us out to be the villain here, saying that we are greedy, that one recent quote was, "We're being melodramatic," which is furthest from the truth. They just can't handle that we're standing up for ourselves now after all this time. This has been going on forever. This is not a new problem. We're just finally doing something about it.
It's a hateful irony for bosses at a hospital to take away healthcare insurance from healthcare workers, urging a safer hospital in the richest country in the world. But this is the nature of the capitalist system. The bosses will go to enormous lengths to preserve their profits at whatever cost to human health and life. And these so-called nonprofit hospitals like Robert Wood Johnson do make profits. Their quote-unquote nonprofit status is a legal fiction. They simply make profits in another name and put it towards exorbitant salaries for healthcare executives or into multi-billion-dollar investment portfolios.
This is a company that is not about health or care. It's profit-driven. It's a not-for-profit hospital, reaping the benefits of a not-for-profit in order to pay their administrators ridiculous amounts of money and squeeze everybody else. It is a classic greedy scenario, like trying to shame us and embarrass us by saying we're the highest paid in the state. We're not. But when you ask them, how does the administrators pay compare to our pay? Like they never want to talk about that how 16 million or 18 million. Our last CEO made somewhere around 17 million a year. I'll probably never hit that in my lifetime of pouring my blood into that.
The only response to these disgusting strong-arm tactics like taking away workers' health care is for workers to disrupt the boss's profits and force them to give in. And that's exactly what RWJ nurses are doing. Nurses have even continued to strike in the face of attacks by the courts. On September 18th, a New Jersey Superior Court judge issued a temporary restraining order against the striking nurses at the behest of hospital executives against the union's peaceful picketing and demonstration on streets and public sidewalks outside the hospital campus in an attempt to intimidate and threaten them. The hospital bosses are using this restraining order to demonize the striking nurses. A spokesperson for the hospital said, quote, "This order is needed to prevent injury or worse from the increasingly dangerous activities of the picketers," end quote.
This statement is the opposite of reality. Who is causing the injury here? It's the hospital administration that has been engaging in dangerous activities by chronically short-staffing these hospitals, which, based on the statistics, have no doubt led to countless avoidable patient deaths. This restraining order is being used as a tool to try and explicitly prevent workers from using the tactics needed to win their strike and protect their patients, public picketing and rallying, all so that the university administration can continue to short-staff the facility, which will lead to more unnecessary deaths. As one nurse said, quote, "They've been trying to break our spirit, but they woke a sleeping giant, and I don't think they realize that yet," end quote. Nurses have refused to back down and are persisting in their demands, which so far, the bosses have gone to shameful lengths to avoid agreeing to. Another trick management used to try and break the strike was offering a bonus to nurses of $20 more per hour in return for conceding to lower staffing levels. The bosses offered this not because they're generous, but because it's cheaper for their own bottom line to dangle short staffing bonuses as a carrot than it is to staff the hospital adequately. Nurses heroically voted to reject that offer and continue the strike. They have refused to be bought off by hospital bosses who are looking for any way to avoid paying the cost of fixing the real problem of staffing levels.
To be clear, the bosses at Robert Wood Johnson can absolutely afford to staff the hospital safely, and they haven't even claimed otherwise. RWJ Barnabas Health, which owns the hospital, is the largest employer in the state of New Jersey. The CEO, Mark Manigan, makes over $16 million a year, and the hospital system has nearly $5 billion in net assets. Here he is, CEO Manigan. Does this smug asshole look like he's about to go broke? And this is Bill Arnold, head of the New Brunswick Hospital where nurses are on strike. He makes a little over $1.5 million a year in compensation. Hospitals don't work because of rich bosses like Mark Manigan or Bill Arnold. They work because of nurses and other healthcare workers who staff those facilities and make them run. Yet it's the nurses who are forced into understaffed, underpaid jobs while the CEOs get rich.
So nickel and diming seems to be their method of operation. It starts from everything you can possibly think of, every material I need. In my perfect world, I should be able to open a big closet and have everything I need available to me. Mm-hmm. Not the case. Everything is so laborsome to achieve anything that you do in the day for your patient. If I need a pillow, if I need lotion, if I need a certain IV fluid, you can't imagine the barriers to getting just the things you need sometimes. Not to mention if I have a kid who has a prescription to go home with like a wheelchair or the amount of work I have to do while still worrying about this kid who's in the recovery room who just had anesthesia in order to make anything happen is mind-blowing.
Yet another despicable anti-union measure by RWJ bosses has been scabbing, the use of replacement nurses.
We'll now go to Nurse Stephanie Torres to explain how this rotten management is using replacement nurses and paying them 4 times as much to try and break the strike.
RWJ Barnabas, an underwriter for NJ Spotlight, has used replacement nurses over the last 2 months to cover the 1,700 nurses that are on strike. The union says those replacement nurses are earning as much as 4 times what union nurses make.
If they would have used the $1,700 a week that they're spending on these scab nurses and invested it in the nurses that have been here for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 plus years, you will attract so many nurses across the state.
The nurses, throughout it all, have refused to give in to the attacks and threats. They have voted down multiple offers, and they have voted 3 different times to continue the strike. They are employing militant tactics like organizing protests outside the homes of hospital executives to make their demands heard. If the nurses are going to win, they need a spotlight on their struggle, and they need the unflinching support of the entire labor movement.
I can't even believe we're in this fight. It's just ludicrous how it's spiraled into what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of what you shared, Carol, about the abysmal situation that is created obviously for the nurses and we just talked about that, but also for the patients, as you so eloquently explained. In my mind, all of this also points towards how for-profit healthcare simply does not work for most of us, whether you're a worker or a patient in the hospital, and that we urgently need Medicare for all so that we can have big business and the wealthiest pay for healthcare that actually is run in the interests of workers and patients. What do you think?
I 100% support that. I would still have benefits right now if we had that.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And we just had a conversation this morning that why is it that yes, the hospital, I get my health benefits through them, but I have to pay extra for dental, eyeglass, and God forbid, mental health. It's a sick thing that we're dealing with here.
Can you tell us what has the reaction from the Democratic establishment been to your strike?
Well, I would say that is my biggest disappointment. I can't believe how enmeshed the hospital and the Middlesex County Democrats are. I really had hoped for so much more. I can't believe that so many people are willing to just profit off of patient care and willing to cut that in order to save face for whatever political relationships they have. And I feel naive that I was so unaware. I feel really naive. And so many of the nurses, we're doing political education classes now. We have people every single day coming in and teaching politics 101. We're not going to leave this strike the same type of a voter at all.
That's really awesome to hear. By the way, Carol, we need this kind of political education inside the labor movement. And in fact, one of the things we should be teaching, in addition to how neither the Democrats nor the Republican establishment support workers, is also the history of the militant labor movement, because so many lessons are available to us if only we had a chance to explore that history.
The labor movement should urgently mobilize to escalate the pressure on the bosses at Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital. That means other unions helping to organize mass rallies, mass pickets, expanding the protests at hospital bosses' houses, and donating generously if necessary to make sure that striking nurses have the resources they need. It may also require disrupting the other operations of RWJ Barnabas in the state to increase the financial pressure. On Strike and Worker Strike Back stand completely on the side of striking nurses at Robert Wood Johnson and their union. We urge our supporters in the New York, New Jersey area to join them on the picket line. Worker Strike Back will support the nurses however we can to win this fight for safe staffing and for the wages and benefits that nurses deserve.
And as I just explained, I take only the average worker's wage as a socialist city council member in Seattle. The rest of my six-figure city council salary after taxes goes into a solidarity fund to support workers' movements. I'll be donating $1,000 from this solidarity fund to the nurses' strike. If you're able to donate any amount, please do so. The address where you can donate is in the episode description. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe and like buttons. On Strike is a production of Worker Strike Back, a nationwide organization fighting on working class demands like a $25 an hour minimum wage, union jobs, Medicare for all, and against discrimination and oppression. Worker Strike Back is also calling for a new party for working people because neither the Republican Party nor the Democratic Party represents us. Find out more at workerstrikeback.org and donate. And look for us on Patreon to support our work. On Strike is a broadcast entirely for working people, funded entirely by working people. See you next week. Solidarity.